if we next, I'm actually going to use greenhouse institutional approach in order to analyze the relationship between fertility and mobility. So this piece of this greenhouse institutional approach is that institutional structures that are beyond an individual's control provide the frame of reference for a couple's fertility decisions to achieve the desired mobility goals. She argued that in late traditional Chinese society, couples aimed to be part of the imperial bureaucracy. So that was their mobility goals. However, there was no rationale as such to limit family size because the cost of raising children was minimal. This is, for example, aptly described in the phrase two chopsticks and a bowl. And therefore, what families did was that in order to ensure that at least one child clears their imperial exam, they focused on that particular child who they thought was most able and most likely to clear those examinations. Now, moving on to the current neoliberal context in India, we find that neoliberal economic policies that have been pursued for the last 30 years or so have generated economic growth along with increasing opportunities and aspirations. However, at the same time, the environment is competitive, which limits access to these opportunities. The expenses to access quality education is prohibitive. I also think that COVID is an additional dimension in this framework because it is likely to exacerbate inequalities, particularly the cost associated with education. To frame my research, I draw on the classical Bakerian quantity-quality trade-off. So as all of you are aware, that this trade-off argues that couples who are higher the income scale will have a smaller family size because they are more inclined to invest in the quality of their children as opposed to quantity of children. However, there is a lot of literature which highlights that there are instances in which this trade-off may not hold. For example, if there is provision of public schooling, then even those who are at the lower end of the income scale will be willing to invest in the quality of their children as opposed to the quantity of children. The greater acceptance of women in the labor force and a rise of dual earner families also breaks this quantity quality trade-off. So then my question is as follows. What is the relationship between mobility and fertility among couples in India? And I argue that upwardly mobile families are more likely to be desirous of moving up the scale and hence have fewer children than those who are not. So I draw on the panel component of the India Human Development Survey, which, as most of you know, is a multi-topic, nationally representative survey of about 42,000 households across India. And my analytical sample is limited to women between the ages of 15 to 49 years at the time at the time of IHDS 1, and who were interviewed in both the rounds of the survey. My analytical sample is about 32,000 women. My outcome variable is the ideal number of children. IHDS asked all women in ages of 15 to 49 about their fertility behavior and history, including their fertility preferences. So for each round, I have information on what they consider to be the ideal number of children. So between if there is a upward revision of the desired fertility desired fertility between 2005 and 2012, I coded as 0. If there is no change in the ideal number of children, it is coded as 1. And if there is a downward revision of desired fertility, I coded as 2. This is my outcome variable. My first key independent variable is the well-being. This is measured, is actually change in objective well-being between 2005 and 2012. So for each of I have their quintiles in 2005 and 2012. And between these two rounds of data collection, either the household became worse off, or they remained in the same quintile, or they became better off between these two survey waves. And I hypothesize that those who are either better off or are in the same quintile in 2012 vis-a-vis 2005 will have reduced or unchanged levels of desired fertility. My second key independent variable is change in subjective well-being between 2005 and 2012. Households in the survey were posed a direct question in 2012. Compared to 7 years ago, would you say your household is economically doing the same, better, or worse today? And there are three possible answers to this question. Either they are worse off today, that is in 2012 as compared to 2005. Either they are the same in 2012 as in 2005. And finally, they are better off in 2012 as compared to 2005. My hypothesis remains the same. Those who feel that they are better off or the same in 2012 as compared to 2005 are likely to have a lower or unchanged desired fertility level than those who are not. My third key independent variable is percentage expenditure on private tuition. Education is a means of social mobility in India, and there is empirical research linking educational attainment with various other dimensions of well-being, such as health, social networks, and civic participation. At the same time, there are concerns about quality of education that is imparted by the government schooling system. Parents, therefore, in order to bridge this gap, undertake additional expenses in the form of tuition. My hypothesis is that in states with higher expenditure on education provide greater chances of mobility than states in which the percentage of private expenditure on tuition is not high. Therefore, couples residing in these former states are more likely to have lower or remain at the same fertility levels than those who are not. And I have four categories of states in terms of low education, in terms of their expenditure on private tuition. Low education expenditure states are those where the expenditure is between 0 and 0.25%. A lower middle education expenditure states where it is greater than 0.25 and less than or equal to 0.5%. Middle education expenditure states where it is greater than 0.5 and less than or equal to 1%. And high education expenditure states where it is greater than 1% and less than or equal to 3%. I run a ordinal logistic regression model, and I have three models because I have three key independent so I have three key independent variables because I have three models corresponding to three key independent variables, and I have a set of controls. I control for social groups, I control for rural or urban residents, women's age group, and her education. And I also take into account the fact that whether the woman has a say on the number of children she should have. I additionally control for their state residence. Now, before moving on to the multivariate regression, let's just have a brief look at the descriptives. As you can see from here, these graphs do not indicate a very strong relationship between mobility and fertility. I don't know how should I. Okay. So yeah. So for example, let's just look at change in objective well-being. Those who were better off in 2012, about 23% reported an upward revision in their fertility levels. This is about the same as those who were worse off in 2012. So again, just to reiterate, there is not the descriptives per se do not indicate a strong relationship between mobility and fertility levels. Now, if we so let's just now see if these results also hold true in a multivariate regression format, in a multivariate regression framework. So when the outcome variable is change in objective well-being between 2005 and 2012, we did not find any significant association between the change in between the independent variable and the outcome variable. However, when when the independent variable is changed in subjective well-being between 2005 2012 and fertility levels, we find that there is some association between fertility levels reported by those who said that they had the same level of subjective well-being as in both 2012 and 2005 and fertility levels. However, we do not find any association for those who reported that they were better off subjectively in 2012 than in 2005. The strongest support for our hypothesis comes from model 3, where the key independent variable is residence in the states categorized in terms of expenditure on private tuition. Here we find that as compared to residents in low expenditure states, residents in lower middle category or high category of states is associated with a decline, with either reporting no change in desired fertility levels or a downward revision of desired fertility levels. So in conclusion, then we find that improvements in material well-being have no association with a change in desired fertility levels in 2005. Subjective well-being has some association, but the strongest association is between percentage expenditure on private tuition and reduced fertility levels. To conclude, then, context of material well-being appears to be less relevant than the opportunities of mobility offered by educational opportunities in helping to reduce fertility desires. So that is all from my end, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting set of data there. I'm always amazed at the variety of situations across India, the subcontinent. We have apparently lost our first speaker, so we will move directly on to the third speaker. But before introducing the third speaker, I'd like to remind everyone that the chat box is the place to put your questions. Pa Agus, moderator 2, has put some instructions for entering questions for the 3 speakers. Remember to indicate which speaker you want to direct your question to. And at the end of the third paper, we will move directly on to the questions, and Pa Agus will direct the question time. Our third speaker is Rina Herartri from the BKKBN, and she will be talking about the comparison of fertility patterns of migrant and non-migrant women in Indonesia. Rina, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Pak Terry. Good afternoon. Allow me to share my presentation. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The title of my presentation is Internal Migration, Contraceptive Use and Fertility in Indonesia. My name is Rina Heratri, and the other author of this paper is Wisnu Fadila. We are a researcher at the Population Study Center, BKKBN, Indonesia. This is the outline of the presentation: background, objective, conceptual framework, hypothesis, data and method, results, and discussion. Internal migration has been shown by studies to affect the population and social, economic, and demographic structures of many regions in Indonesia. But unfortunately, not much attention are paid by the local governments. For example, many local governments do not have accurate migration data. The 2015 intercensal population survey showed that since the main motive of migration is economic, the main destination areas are high-income provinces such as Riau Islands and Kalimantan. While for the characteristic of the migrants, the majority of them are married, 60%, age 40, age. Excuse me, I cannot. Sorry, I have problems with. Okay. The majority of the migrants are married, age 20 to 29%, so they are in their reproductive age, and most of them are high school graduate, 37%. The data on migration also show that migrants in Indonesia are usually migrating with their families, although in the beginning the head of the family migrated first, but then after they are settled in the new place of residence, the family joining with them. The 2017 Indonesia Demographic and Health Survey revealed that the total fertility rate, or TFR, varied from 1.2 to 3.4 children per woman among provinces, with women in Java and Bali region have lower fertility than the other parts of Indonesia. Contraceptive prevalence rates, or CPR, also varied among provinces, ranging from 38% to 76%. The objective of this study is to examine the contraceptive use and fertility patterns among migrant and non-migrant women in Indonesia. The theoretical framework that we use, this framework describes that fertility is affected by both direct and indirect variables such as socioeconomic factors. Based on the theoretical framework, we built our conceptual framework. The dependent variable is children ever born, and the independent variables are the socioeconomic factors. The hypothesis of the study is that migrant women have characteristic and reproductive behaviors that negatively associated with fertility, and therefore we hypothesize that the migrant women have a higher level of contraceptive use and lower number of children than the non-migrant women. The study uses the 2017 IDHS data with a total of 15,163 currently married women aged 20 to 34. 2,000 among them are migrants, and around 13,000 are non-migrants. They are selected as sample based on the age of the majority of the migrant women. Migrants here are those who had lived in the current place of residence during the 5-year period preceding the survey, or the recent migrant, while non-migrants are those who were born in their current place of residence and or had lived there for longer than 5 years. A multivariate logistic regression analysis is used to explore the relationships between migration, socio-economic status, contraceptive use, and fertility level. So these are the socio-economic characteristics of the samples. Similar with the results of the 2015 ICPS, it can be seen that the migrants are younger than the non-migrant. The majority of the migrant aged 25 to 29, while the non-migrant aged 30 to 34. The educational attainment of the migrants are also higher than the non-migrants. The migrants have a higher proportion of those who completed the secondary education or higher compared to the non-migrant. Mean age at first marriage and at first birth among migrants are higher than the non-migrant. But contrary to the expectation, the percentage of contraceptive use among migrants is lower than the non-migrant, 53% and 60%. However, the mean of children ever born by migrant status in migrant slightly lower than the non-migrant, 1.29 compared with 1.61. And this is the multivariate analysis. It shows that for non-migrant women, the odds ratio for fertility by occupational status, wealth index, and age at first marriage are negative, while there are no significant relationship between contraceptive use and the educational attainment. For the migrant women, the odds ratio for fertility by age and at first marriage is negative, while there are no significant relationship with occupational status, wealth index, age at first birth, contraceptive use, and educational attainment. So the discussion, as I mentioned before, the level of contraceptive use among migrant is lower than that of non-migrant, 48.6% and 51.4% respectively. However, the mean number of children ever born is lower among migrant than that of non-migrant, 1.29 and 1.61 children per woman respectively. This data might be related with the migrants' age because they are still very young, younger than the non-migrant. So they probably still in the stage of realizing the ideal size of the family, and they still want to have another child. And the other possibility is that migration process might also affect the use of contraception, which cause the use of contraceptive among migrant is lower than the non-migrant. But we require further analysis to analyze to learn about the migration fertility relations. We know that there are many theories regarding the relationship between migration and fertility relations, but due to the limitation of the data, we cannot do the analysis based on the theories. Multivariate ordered logistic regression shows that the likelihood towards fertility by age at first birth is significant for non-migrant women. Other variables such as age at first marriage, economic status, and employment status are significant for both groups. The likelihood of having more children by economic and the likelihood of fertility by contraceptive use and education attainment is not significant for both groups. Next, the policy implication based on this data and analysis. The issues on internal migration need to be integrated into local development plan. was the impact of the internal migration on population size and structure, because with the migration, it will affect the size and also the age structure of the population. It will influence the need for health service provision, family planning, and also social services. And also it will have an impact on the age structure, and it will influence the dependency ratio and the ability of the region to achieve the demographic dividend. And second, the importance of the availability of migration data at local levels for population projection, and also to serve as a database for development programs. This is the last slide, suggestion for further research. Considering the age of the migrants, which based on our data are younger than the non-migrant and still in the reproductive age, between 20 to 29. So migration and fertility relations analysis should be examined in terms of current or recent fertility measures in addition to cumulative fertility measures. In the beginning, we try to analyze the fertility using the cumulative fertility measures, but when we look at the age of the migrant, which are still below 30 years, so we decided to choose the majority, the age of the majority of the migrant instead of the cumulative fertility measures. And longitudinal data sources are needed to allow the analysis of the timing of migration and birth history. We have data on birth history from the IDHS, but we don't have the migration history. And we don't know whether the migration is permanent or temporary. So further research are needed to answer all these issues. These are the references that we use. Thank you. That ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ibu Rina. We have been looking for speaker number 1, who was missing at the beginning of the session, and have still not found him. If Yun Jung Shin is in the room, please unmute and let us know. Otherwise, we're going to be moving on to a question and answer period. Before we go further, though, I'd like to remind everyone to put your questions in the chat box. We have a series of questions that have already been we don't have a series of questions.
Yes,
but
we don't have, Prof.
I will give it to Pa Agus to
Yes.
lead the question time. And if no one else has questions, I've got a whole bunch. So I'll leave it to you, Pa Agus, to determine whether among our 41 participants, there's questions coming forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. Terry. While waiting for the question from the participant, actually, I have already list some question to the presenters. Let me read for the question. The first to Miss Ritam Dubey. Miss Ritam Dubey. How about traditional midwife health care, especially for pregnancy health and antenatal care, is still common in India or not? And how do the traditional midwife work together with professional health providers? Is there any government policies in collaborating these two kinds of services? And for the second question, is there any differences in services in healthcare for newborn across rural, urban, or socio-economic status of the region? This is the question for Ms. Ritam Dubey. And to Ms. Manjista Banerjee, I have one question. Do you think that higher economic status will come to low fertility? Why it happens? What are the reasons behind? Yes, it is of course back to the value of children. Normally at traditional life, and mostly those are poor, the value of children will be positive. That means more children are better. In the contrary, for those who are in better standard of living, then the value of children becoming negative. More children are bad. How about it? Based on your research, do you think that higher economic status will come to low fertility, and what are the reasons behind? And to Ibu Rina Herarti, is there any differences in regard to fertility pattern among the type of internal migration? Yes, because we have so many type of internal migration, such as commuting, temporary migration, seasonal migration, and also permanent migration. Is there any differences in regard to the fertility pattern, meaning the number of children? And also, do you have any figures for the fertility pattern? Yeah, means number of children based on who migrates. Maybe a husband migrate or wife migrates. Is there any figures for the difference number of children? Yes, this all Prof. Terry. I have a question for 3 presenters. Maybe start from the first presenter.
Thank you.
So should I go on?
Should I
Sorry, Doctor.
repeat again?
Dr. Ritam, you need to use your.
Should I go on? Am I
Yes.
audible right now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So thank you for your question. And to address the first question, to see the differences between a traditional birth attendant and the other skilled healthcare providers, such as doctors and nurses. The main difference in the service delivery that has been observed in this research and the recent research in recent years is the basic difference in the pedagogy, medical pedagogy, and the way they have been treated to, the way they have been taught to treat emergency obstetric care. So the traditional birth attendants are, even though they acquire skill through shadowing skilled healthcare workers, they are not as par with the services or the skilled services provided by doctors and nurses. So in order to attend to emergency obstetric care, doctors and nurses are still preferred over traditional birth attendants. Coming to the second question, the postnatal care among newborns and the difference or the disparity between the rural and urban areas. In the study, we have, as an extension to the study, we have also explored the rural and urban disparity, and the least urban-rural disparity for coverage of quality postnatal care among newborns was observed for states, Union Territory, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Delhi, and the state of West Bengal. So there is the disparity is closing, that the gap is closing between the care that has been provided to the newborns in both rural and urban care. But there is still a major scope for improvement among the high focus states. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, then for the second presenter. Sorry, Prof. Yes.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think there was a. I'm not quite sure I understood the question correctly, but this is what I think is happening. If parents think that higher expenditure on education will be subsequently backed up by greater employment opportunities and better employment opportunities, then only they would be willing to invest in the quality of their children that I am measuring as a percentage of the total expenses, percentage of the total expenses. And in a scenario in which, there is not avenues of mobility, then parents would not be willing to invest in their children, and therefore higher income is likely. Therefore, better mobility opportunities is going to be associated with lower fertility, lower fertility. So this is my argument, but I'm not quite sure I understood your question in the first place.
Yes, because when we discuss about the value of children, especially for those who already social mobility, for poor, for example, then to the higher level of economic status, comes to lower fertility. Why it happens? Because actually when they have money, actually they can afford the life of the children.
So you are asking why do couples who are already at a higher income level, why are they willing to, why do they have smaller families, right?
Yes.
Okay, that I am not quite sure. That's a good question. But but families who are at the upper income ladder, they also have more educated wives. So that is where and we know that there is a association between education and fertility levels. So I think that may explain a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Ibu Rina.
Yeah, thank Pak Joko for the question. Ideally, if we are analyzing the relations between migration and fertility, we should use the longitudinal data, so we can have data on each of the events of the migration, whether it is temporary or permanent. But unfortunately, for this study, we use the IDHS data, which only has data on the whether the respondent are recent migrant or not. So in the questionnaire, it was just been asked the place of residence during the 5-year preceding the survey. So it will be difficult for us to know whether the migration are permanent or temporary. So we could not do analysis for the different type of migration.
Yes, Ibu Dr. Rina, from the chat box, actually some comment from Mr. Jalal Abbasi. The lower fertility of migrants may be due to the disruption and postponement effects. Migrants tend to postpone their fertility until they establish themselves in the host community. So if you control the timing of their arrival and period of residence, you may get some answers. Yeah, this is just a comment from Mr. Jalal Abbasi. I noticed from the chat box there is no more question, Prof. Terry. So I return back the screen to you, Prof. Terry.
Okay, thank you very much. We have an additional half hour, in part because the first speaker did not show up. And I have been invited to open this session up to the half hour so that people who might have broader issues to discuss could raise them at this stage before closing for the day. I have a couple of comments about the 3 fertility sessions that we have come through. One thing that strikes me is that compared to the 1970s and 1980s, there has been very little discussion of what we call intermediate variables or proximate determinants in the discussion of fertility. The intermediate variable framework, which was developed by Davis and Blake in the 1950s, it was always something I found very useful, because it did say that the determinants of fertility were coming out of 12 essentially biological variables related to human behavior. They're the variables related to marriage, related to conception and contraception, related to abortion, and so forth. When we ignore those in our analysis, we may be missing some of the key behavioral issues that governments need to understand before they start instituting policies to either raise or lower fertility. The second point I wanted to make is that we are uniquely right now on the cusp of a real change in our data sets. If we look at the data sets that have been used today, we can see that they are pre-COVID data sets. We are looking at data sets that have been in the field, involving interviewers going directly house to house. We're learning now that the censuses of 2020 and 2021 are facing real problems of how face-to-face interviews. The countries that we're looking at do not have sufficiently broad coverage of telephone holdings to allow surveyors to do random sample surveys of phone holders. We would not be getting a true random sample, particularly among older people or much younger people. So we are really facing some problems from 2020 into the future as to how we collect data that is being analyzed today by our speakers and the speakers of previous sessions. I'm wondering whether the speakers have any comment on what kind of data they would be looking for in 2021 in order to prepare them for the 6th APA conference, when they'll be doing quite different kinds of papers. And the third comment that I would just have is that this dynamic of having webinars faces some real problems with time zones around the world. When we all fly into the same city and stay at the same hotel, as Ari Sananta told us this morning, it can be very expensive. And while this is cheaper, it does have a cost of missing out on many of our members who are either in quite distant time zones or stuck in their own workload that they can't get away from. When you get on an airplane and fly to Bangkok or Yogyakarta or some other city, you are not going to be as bothered by your work as you could possibly be with a webinar format. If any of the speakers have some suggestions for the future of APA meetings, that'd be great too. So I would just encourage our speakers to comment on my 3 points. Ritam, if you have some comment, that'd be interesting.
So my comment would be about the last point that was raised. This is my first experience of an international conference. So using the virtual mode is actually devoiding me of an opportunity of networking with people who are working in the same field, and uh, even if there is an opportunity to network with people and learn from them about their work, there is a sort of an organic conversation that a conversation and a learning experience that is induced by in-person interaction. So that is definitely being missed through virtual conference, but at the same time, the cheaper mode and the convenience that is induced by other virtual conference gives actually liberates us to explore our workload, and as you said, the workload gives us a flexibility to balance our workload with the conference and attend both of them at the same time. But yes, definitely. But as this is my first experience of an international conference, missing on the part of networking and getting to know people who are across the world working on the same field is something that I have missed. So in future, I hope that after the pandemic settles down and everything gets better, maybe the next APA is something to look forward to, and hope that it would be in person. Thank you.
Manjusta?
Yeah, so this is my first APA as well, and I think, I mean, I do agree that there are some advantages of having remote conferencing, so to speak, but there are flip sides as well, as highlighted by Ritam. And networking and meeting colleagues is definitely one of the things that one looks forward to a conference, and that is missing from the kind of interaction that we are having currently. On the kind of surveys that we should have in a COVID world, in a post-COVID world, I think it is possible to continue to have face-to-face surveys, provided sufficient protocols are uh, are there, which ensure that you maintain all the provided you follow all the COVID protocols. I think it is possible to conduct face-to-face surveys, because like you said, telephonic interviews have their limitations, and you are not able to reach to the most vulnerable populations who do not have access to phone. So I think that we should aim for face-to-face interviews following all COVID protocols.
Thank you. Ibu Rina?
Yeah, Pak Terry. Yeah, we experienced a problem in collecting survey data during the pandemic. Initially, the statistic Indonesia would have the population census last year, and also we are going to have several surveys this year, but we could not do it in a conventional way. We have tried to use, like Pak Terry mentioned, to use the information technology, such as the email, the internet, and the telephone. But yeah, it only covered a small proportion of the community who have access to those technology. So we have to think about other measure, other techniques to collect data. One of the technique that we have tried to use, we haven't been used this before. We work with people who are used to analyze big data from the social media, because during the pandemic, the use of social media have been increasing, and it could be used also as a source of data for For example, we want to assess or evaluate the use of family planning service during the pandemic, and also some other issues. We try to use the big data. Of course, we cannot get detailed information as we can get from a conventional survey with a long questionnaires. We can only analyze the statement of the user, the media user. But yeah, I think at this point, those are the best ways that we can do to get information that we need for developing the program, the activities during the pandemic. And of course, there are advantages and disadvantages, the positive, negatives of being for meeting physically like we used to have, and also with the virtual meeting. I think the other speakers have described the difference. The feel also different if we are meeting face to face. We were able to discuss, to connect with many people, researchers from around the world, and by using this technology. And I think using this technology also probably hindered some of the participants, because of, for me, myself also, I was worried that probably or I might lost the internet connection while I was presenting. Especially for Indonesia, for other countries maybe it's not really a problem. For us, it's still a problem to have good internet connection. Probably that's all, Terry, that I can.
Thank you very much. I see one hand raised, Dr. Mohammed Jalal Abbasi Shavazi, who I hope has a good internet connection to allow us. It also gives us a chance for Dr. Ritam to do some networking, because I should introduce Jalal as the founder and first president of the Asian Population Association. And so though you cannot share a meal with him, at least you can see him with his background there. So Jalal, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you, Terry. I couldn't actually refrain from not raising the hand, because I'm very delighted that the APA conference, the 5th APA conference, is going so well. But it is unfortunate that we are not able to see each other in person, and we wish to have sometimes having meal and being together in Jakarta or any other places in Indonesia, and that's a missing opportunity that we have at the moment. And our colleagues in Indonesia should, I think, repeat the conference or organize other workshops so that we won't be missing a lot. So that's a promise that we can get from our colleagues in Indonesia. And it's great to see you, Terry, Suripon, and I'm seeing Saupak and other colleagues who have spent a lot of time on establishing the association, and they now can see the fruits of their relentless efforts, including you and other colleagues who have done a lot for establishing the APA. So a great platform for exchanging knowledge, and also getting the spirit of scientific atmosphere across Asia. I have a minor comment that I mentioned actually in the chat box. The lower fertility of migrants is partly due to the disruption effect, as migrants usually tend to postpone their fertility, their marriage, before they establish themselves, get a house or job, or being adopted to the destination place or the host community. The other reason may be to do the selectivity effect. So you should check whether those who are coming to the destination or host society are the same as those who are living in their place of origin, or if you compare them with those in the destination place are basically similar. So you may be comparing some educated and also well-off people with high aspirations coming for higher education, and then now they have low fertility. They would have had low fertility even if they stayed at their place of origin. So that was a minor comment that I wanted to raise, but mainly wanted to seize this opportunity and say hi to Terry and all of colleagues who are present in this room, and express my joy of having this APA being established, and also having the 5th conference successfully going on these days. Thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you very much, Jalal. Could you just mention to us, because we are short on speakers from West Asia, we've been talking about total fertility rates in East Asia. What is happening now in Iran with the total fertility rate in the last few years?
Okay. Fertility, as we know, have been on the decline in recent years in many countries across Asia, particularly, I mean, in the Middle East and in Iran. Fertility declined to below replacement level in 2000. Then during 2016, 2020, almost, I mean, not 2000, between 2011 and 2016, it recovered and bounced back to from 1.8 to 2.1. But over the last 3 or 4 years, due to the economic situation, partly due to the sanctions, and also with recent COVID situation, fertility has declined to 1.7. It's between 1.6 and 1.7. So it has a lot of implications for population growth in the country. It has led the government has changed the population policy to a pronatalist one. And there are a lot of discussions going on about the reasons why fertility is so low. And the question now is, how low will the fertility go in the future? And we should also consider that this situation is happening elsewhere in other countries in the region. It's not unique to East Asia anymore. It's interesting that some of the provinces in Iran are experiencing fertility, I mean, very low fertility, 1.3, 1.2. In Tehran, for example, we have 1.4. I mean, it's one of the provinces that has been the vanguard of change over the last 3 decades, but having fertility 1.2 and 1.1, it's something, a new phenomenon, particularly for an Islamic country, a conservative society, that universal marriage is being practiced, but at the same time, fertility is being postponed. And what we see these days is that even marriage is being postponed. I mean, it was interesting that Rino talked about migrants having higher aged marriage. And this is also the case for the population at large. And the reason is that because we are having more younger, educated people who are seeking for a better life, for employment, their aspirations is high, and there has been an ideational change, and it's difficult to convince them to marry, if at all they are interested in. And so it would be interesting to compare some countries that have similar culture, Muslim countries, Indonesia and Iran. And also even in Afghanistan, you see the youth and people who are basically hopeless, I should say, given the current situation, being unemployed, having high aspirations, and at the same time being and living in a globalized world. So these are all are the factors affecting the marital life, fertility desires, and fertility behavior of the next generation that we should all consider and have some policies facilitating marriage and childbearing in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. That's a great contribution. I know that over the next 2 days, we're going to have quite a few more sessions of relevance. I was mentioning intermediate variables before. I noticed that tomorrow morning, I say morning, it'll be morning in Jakarta, there will be sessions on union formation, marriage, contraception, and then there will also be throughout the day more sessions relevant to this this topic. Let me let the three speakers maybe have the last word. We have a few minutes, so I would like to invite you, if you have any reactions back. We don't see any more questions in the question box, but Dr. Ritam, would you like to say something at this stage to wrap up your presentation? Yeah.
I would just like to thank PA for giving me this opportunity to share the research study, and I would encourage if anyone has any questions regarding the research study that I presented, they can contact me on the email ID that I have mentioned in the presentation. Thank
Great.
you again.
Great. Manjushta?
No, I also don't have any comments at this stage. I would like to thank everyone for listening to my presentation. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Ibu Rina, do you have any reaction to Pak Jalal's comments?
Yeah, I would like to thank his comment that it is true, as Pak Joko mentioned before also. I think it is the ideal is to have the longitudinal data on migration. So we have the exact time of the migration. When is the migration? When is the marriage, and also the birth history. So we can have a better understanding of why, for example, the use of contraceptives among migrant women are lower, while the fertility are also lower. Is it because of the socialization theory or the selectivity theory, like Jalal has mentioned before, or the disruption because the migration process probably they could not get the family planning service right away at the new home, things like that. And yeah, I hope in the future probably Pak Joko could help me to do a better analysis of the migration and fertility, because internal migration now becoming increasing in Indonesia, but it seems that we we and the local governments do not pay enough attention for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just a personal comment. Some of the research that I did in the 1980s and 90s in Eastern Indonesia and also in Jakarta and Yogyakarta, we found that depending on the type of migration, many times people were separated from their families for long periods of time. We also note that there are many groups in Indonesia, like servants, in household servants, who are sending money back to villages, and they very seldom see their families, maybe once a year. And if at that time they don't get pregnant, which they try not to because they have to go back to work and earn money, you would find that migrants would have lower fertility, but also lower contraceptive use, because there's no point to contraceptive use if they're 800 miles from their spouse. So I think there's a lot of issues that might be sought out through the existing literature. I will now turn the screen over to Pak Joko again. We have 3 minutes to wrap up, but Pak Joko, I'd let you have the final word.
Thank you very much, Prof. Terry. This is a very good and nice discussion. And I think all of those issues are very important, especially in this pandemic time. And in the future, I think we need to have more comprehensive data, and then we can compare between the situation, especially population dynamics before and after pandemic times. I think this all from me, Prof. Terry. Thank you very much. And this is actually the first time for me to join APA conference. Thank you.
Welcome to APA, and welcome to all new members who have joined this conference. It's wonderful to have you as part of the APA group. Of course, APA in Indonesian means what?
Yes.
Apa itu?
Yes, of course, Prof. Terry.
So the APA would like to thank you all for your contributions. Don't forget tomorrow morning to sign up again. We will be leaving this session now, and unless there is anyone with any other questions or comments, I will declare this session closed. And thank you again for all your presentations. Please applaud the speakers. Okay.